Hello and very good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Chain Dubai's event for the very first one, that is for this year 2022. Sorry, it was initially supposed to be happen in 2021, but because of the COVID issues, we were not able to hold it. So today's theme is COP26, and the themes are the climate change and the sustainability. So what's Chain about? It's about sharing the knowledge and experience, cooperation between the organizations, building a community for the young engineers, promoting the benefits of engineering institutions, providing continuous professional development. And today's theme is climate change and sustainability. So here's the agenda for today's program. We will be having a short introduction to the chain, then the UAE's initiatives and policies and the COP28. And there we have 4 speakers from the professional institutions, that is from the ISTRT, ICE, Society of Engineers, and Institution of Mechanical Engineers, followed by 20 minutes of panel discussion and summary of the notes and token of thanks. We are very thankful to our supporters who have supported in this particular event, and we look forward for the collaboration in the future events as well. And from the Society of Engineers to ISTRT, Institution of Civil Engineers, and Institution of Mechanical Engineers. And a short video, about what is change, a small introduction. This is from the London Showcase.
I think collaboration is hugely important for engineering institutions. I think coming together to share ideas to solve the problems that we have in society at the moment is really important.
It's such a big subject, engineering, and so there are so many interesting people and sharing ideas between electrical engineers, mechanical engineers, medical engineers. You learn so much. It's fantastic.
Things we talked about today, about carbon, about changing people's attitudes, about life and health, they're common across the whole thing. So I think change is fantastic. It encourages engineers to get together and realise that we've got common solutions.
I think being a member of an engineering institution has really benefited my career because from the word go, I've understood the importance of becoming professionally qualified. So it's really kind of broadened my horizons in terms of who I mix with, who I can get advice from, and who I can mentor myself.
I think the message today for the event, for people to attend, I want to go away thinking, I thought myself as an engineer, but I had no idea that engineering also meant this or meant that, and just feeling a bit more part of an engineering community.
That was a short promotion, or you can say a little bit of an introduction of what Chain is about. And we are on the social media, so you can also follow us on the facebook.com/Chain Dubai, at LinkedIn, on the Chain events, and on the Twitter, #Chain18. So we begin with our today's COP26. So let's get back a little bit in the history and what is about the UAE's history of the climate change, climate action. And it all began in 1975, and since then it has evolved in various stages. So it all began in 1975, then UAE has joined in 1995 the United Nations Framework Convention on the Climate Change, UNFCCC, and in 2009, it became the permanent host country of the International Renewable Energy Agency, and in 2015 joined the Paris Agreement, and finally in 2021, which was a very remarkable year, which is also the year of the 50th, wherein the UAE was celebrating the 50 years of its formation, organized the UAE Regional Climate Dialogue, participated in the Leaders Summit in the Climate, announced a bid to host the COP28 in 2023. So it's about the early adaptation of the green building regulations in the UAE, and we have different bodies, the regulations to say in different emirates, and that is with the Turkey's Asidama, Emirates Green Building, and Barjil in Ras Al Khaimah. UAE's sustainability agenda, it focuses on achieving the sustainable development goals, enable access to clean energy, adequate and affordable food, quality education and healthcare, sustainable economic growth, health ecosystems, and increase the resource efficiency. The UAE also pledged to leave no one behind and to shift the world to a sustainable and resilient path. So these are the global, the sustainable development goals and the initiatives in each of the Emirates. And if we talk about Dubai, then by 2030, it aims to have 25% from the renewable energy, 30% energy savings, and 30% water savings. And these are the initiatives and the projects undertaken. As you know, there are 17 UN SDG goals, and some of them are listed here. And these are the projects that have been undertaken by the United Arab Emirates government. Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum Global Initiative, that's for the No Poverty, Al Jalila Foundation, Good Health and Wellbeing, Dubai Cares, Quality Education, Water Sanitation and Hygiene, UAE Food Bank, Zero Hunger, International Humanitarian City, Industry, Innovation and Infrastructure, Masdar City, Affordable and Clean Energy, Sustainable Cities and Communities, Noor Bank Foundation, Good Health and Wellbeing, Sustainable Schools, Quality Education, UAE Water Aid Initiative, Clean Water and Sanitation, Zayed bin Sultan Al Nahyan Charitable and Humanitarian Foundation Partnership for Goals. And this is the MOCA's sustainability effort. And you can see here the goal number 13, which is of the UN SDG of the climate action. And these are the 4 strategic goals that the UAE is currently working on the National Climate Change Plan of the UAE 2017 to 2050, UAE Energy Strategy Plan, that is 2050, and National Climate Change Adaptation Program, and the CLICS Initiative. The CLICS Initiative is basically from the Abu Dhabi. And also it has international partners, and you can see the International Union for the Conservation of the Nature and the United Nations Environmental Programme, UAE Energy Strategy 2050. It was launched in 2017, and it aims to the contribution of clean energy in a total energy mix from 25% to 50% by 2050. However, it is also aiming it to have it by 70%, 75%, 70 to 75%, reduce the carbon footprint, and also increase the consumption efficiency of individuals and corporates by 40%. So in a total, it aims to have 44% clean energy, 38% gas, 12% clean coal, 6% nuclear energy. The government also aims to invest 600 billion dirhams by 2050 to meet the growing energy demand and ensure the sustainable growth for the country's economy. What is the UAE Net Zero 2050? So it announced its strategy initiative on 7th of October. That is just 1 month before it was awarded the bid for the COP28 and the UAE Pavilion at the Expo 2020 Dubai. It's an ambitious strategy to reduce the carbon emissions by 2050. Its initiative aligns with the principles of the 50 and with the Paris Agreement, and also cites to invest 600 billion dirhams in the clean and renewable energy sources in the next 3 decades. So finally, on the 11th of November, the UN Framework Convention of Climate Change, UNFCCC, made an official announcement that UAE will be hosting the event COP28 Climate Conference between 6th to 17th of November. And to his inputs, His Highness Sheikh Mohammed stated that we will put all our capabilities to make this conference a success. the UAE will remain committed to a global climate action to protect the climate and the planet. And how did the UAE win it? It's UAE's forward-looking and inclusive approach to proactively tackling the climate change. It has got its position. So Mariam bin Mohammed Al Mahri, UAE's Minister of Climate Change and Environment, stated is ready to deliver a meeting that mobilizes countries to boost their efforts to fight the climate change. And from here, we have our first speaker from the ISRC-TE, Engineer Iman Saab. She is the Technical Director and Middle East Professional and Technical Excellence Lead at the McDonald's. And here's the platform for you.
Thank you, Rependeep, for this great reminder on the UAE initiatives towards climate change and sustainable development goals. I'm going to try to share my screen. And let me know, please, when you can see.
Yeah, it's clearly visible.
Great. So good evening to all. It's a great pleasure first for me to participate in this conference. I wish to thank you, the organizers, Jane, Rependeep, and all the 35 plus attendees with us tonight. Thank you for the introduction, Rependeep. And aside from my role in Mott MacDonald, I'm also a committee member of the ISRC-TE regional group, a role that I'm very proud of. We have a very active committee in Dubai. We have overall around 360 members comprising students and fellows and chartered members. I'd like to take this opportunity in this 20 minutes to briefly touch on where we stand as practicing structural engineers and our responsibilities towards climate change. And starting with the key takeaways from the COP26, I think in summary, there are two primary aspects of the Glasgow Pact. One is adaptation, which is taking measures to deal with the effects of global warming, and two, mitigation, which is essentially reducing our greenhouse emissions to reduce global warming. And both have a direct impact on the built environment sector. In short, we need a 45% reduction in CO2 emissions by 2030 and achieving our net zero by mid-century. So the focus on reusing material and efficient design and minimizing our reliance on new material is key and must sit at the core of every project we work on. How can we drive these actions? And I'd like to start with two important facts to remind ourselves with how much structural engineering contributes towards climate change. Fact number one, 40% of the global energy-related emissions, carbon dioxide emissions, are due to buildings and construction. And fact two, half of carbon emissions are due to embodied carbon, and 2/3 of this half is accounted for by the structure. And here I'm referring to a modern building which is fully compliant with the codes and a best practice building. Of course, the other half of those emissions are from the operational energy emissions of the building. So with these two simple facts, I hope we all agree that we have a major role to play as structural engineers and civil engineers. Let's move on to the good news, and many of it was already listed by Rependeep. I'd just like to reiterate those that are relevant to our profession in this region. One, the UAE Energy Plan commitment, which aims to be net zero by 2050. And equally the various regional commitments from other countries, other Gulf countries, the policies that are taking place at the moment. And two, the institution which I belong to, the ISRC-TE, and their commitment through the Climate Emergency Task Group, which provides guidance and sets the responsibilities for engineers towards climate change. I wish to emphasize here that our institution has taken this task very seriously. It has introduced requirements within the exams and professional review interview for engineers to justify their knowledge about carbon calculation and carbon management. So in short, this is no longer a nice to have skill. This is a must have skill for engineers to become chartered, but also to maintain their status throughout the CPD submissions. Zooming into UAE, our iStruct regional group is equally active in this regard, and we have formed a carbon study group to raise awareness and assist our industry as much as possible in terms of benchmarking and setting targets for embodied carbon. So I think as engineers in the UAE, we are very well placed, very well supported to respond to climate emergency. If we move to our responsibilities when designing our future cities, in my opinion, we should be focusing on three key aspects, which are very much linked to each other: a sustainable design, a resilient design, and digitizing our design as much as possible. Of course, safe design is a must, and there is no need to mention this. If we start with sustainable design and what it means, just a quick reminder for us that embodied carbon covers the total life cycle of the asset. It covers the carbon emitted in the collection, manufacture, transportation, assembly, maintenance, and recycling and disposal of the asset. And if we are designing a building now, we can relatively easily calculate the carbon emitted in the construction of the building, or what we call a capital carbon. But there is little more uncertainty in calculating carbon tied to the use and maintenance and deconstruction of buildings. Obviously, most of our efforts as structural engineers and civil engineers go into the design stage and all the way to the delivery of the asset. We probably need more efforts to influence the entire life cycle to one, deconstruct and dispose the assets and reuse and recover. By closing the whole loop, as you see on the top right corner, or what we call cradling to grave, we are on the right path towards net zero. The rest, of course, is operational carbon, and here is a forward thought as we move more towards decarbonization and passive buildings design and green and blue roof, whichever wins, etc. I think the contribution of the operational carbon might be relatively lower as compared to the embodied carbon, which means that our contribution as structural engineers will become even more and we'll have more responsibility. And we want to be at the forefront in a driving seat instead of a reactive backseat. This is key. If we put embodied carbon into perspective now, one return flight to the UK, New York emits 1 ton of carbon. An average person in the UAE emits around, say, 4 tons of carbon. And perhaps if we do some changes to our lifestyle by cycling to work or cutting on meats, etc., we can save 2 tons of carbon at most. And this is all good, and we should be doing that. However, it's estimated that every structural engineer makes 20% saving on its design. We can save 200 tons of carbon. So you can imagine the impact that we make in our professional lives as compared to our personal lives. So 20% saving, how hard is that? It appears that 20% is easily achievable by doing some simple changes to our design and by using the right materials efficiently. And I'd like to mention a few here where I think we can find a few easy wins to achieve the 20%. I'll start by looking at the choice of material, and depends where the building is located. We understand that the embodied carbon, for example, of timber in New Zealand is not the same as in UAE. So it depends where the construction material is sourced from, of course. So when choosing material, whether it's steel, aluminum, concrete, composite, etc., We often choose based on structural depth, grid spacing, aesthetics, speed of construction, etc. We need to start looking at embodied carbon in every different option that we analyze and use these figures to raise awareness and drive choices with our clients. The second one is soil investigation. Obviously, every modern building in the UAE will have a soil investigation report at hand. The point I'm making here is that for us to look at the geotechnical parameters that are used for the design, question the margin of safety use, see if we can do maybe further test or upfront testing to see if we can save, reduce those parameters, look at how much the superstructure can take in terms of deformation, and relook at those parameters and see if we can do any savings. Building foundations can take different forms. And in the choice of foundations, it's not just the embodied carbon coming from the foundation itself. We need to look at them holistically and examine our waterproofing and our cuts and fills, our dewatering, etc. And that goes with every structural member that we assess in terms of embodied carbon. Multidisciplinary coordination or discussion, and this one may seem a bit odd, but it might be one of the most important ones in my experience, because good solutions don't come from civil engineers alone or mechanical engineers alone. Good solutions come through teamwork and through discussions. And another easy one is material specification. Try and specify recycled materials in our mixes, even increasing the proportions where possible up to the superstructure. We will be surprised at how much we can do this with probably minimum or no impact on the cost, and adding all the other advantages related to durability and long-term performance. And the last one, last but not least, look at our margin of utilization. We structural engineer want to deliver a safe building, and the scary part is, what if our safe buildings become over-designed? Can we increase our margin of utilization from maybe 85% to even 95%? In the UAE, we have relatively good quality control on sites, and this is a real benefit. We should take advantage of that. In my experience, when we try to standardize sections, we tend to lower our margin of utilization, maybe from 80 to 60% towards the end. So it's worth looking again at the standardization. Whilst it's helped to expedite the construction and facilitate it, it's worth to look again once we standardize and try to increase the margin of utilization again. So these are a few ideas around design, around sustainable design, and achieving this 20% saving. The next one is resilient design and structural resilience, which essentially means the ability to rapidly resume the use of buildings following a shock incident, and that could be anything from a flooding, an earthquake, or any extreme weather event. And this is done by addressing a few aspects which are very important while conducting our design. We need to consider one, appropriate damage limitation to reduce the need for repair, and this effectively reduces the life cycle embodied carbon as well. Of course, design for life safety and environmental protection, and structural adaptation, which is essentially the ability to meet changing circumstances. And this could be change of demand, a change of use, or other environmental changes as well. And it's very important to recognize that a resilient design is not an over-designed building. Many people have this misconception. A resilient design can be a lean design by looking at our margins of utilization. I will not go too much in detail on this one. I just would like to highlight an important fact here. It's that at the same time as many populations are increasing and moving to cities, some population like Europe and Japan are shrinking. And this represents a complex problem for structural engineers, because whilst we want our building to be constructed and expected to be in use for the next, say, 60 or 120 years for bridges, we need to also provide structures that are resilient, healthy, productive in the medium term, but demountable and potentially reusable in the long term. So this is a very important consideration when we consider resilience in buildings. Let's move to the third area, which is digitizing our design. And I'm not referring here to the use of software only, but also digitizing our asset management, our processes, reporting, our operations, our site activities, etc., etc. There are numerous benefits of digitizing our design, and only a few are listed on this slide. From saving to design time, facilitating coordination, carbon calculation, better control of construction activities, reducing errors and redo, monitoring our assets through building information modeling, and perhaps digital twins as well. So alongside digitization, we need to always raise awareness of the potential risks of the digital system can bring, and of course have a robust digital security. So a lot of opportunities in there that we should be using. Aside from structural design, we need as structural engineers to influence the construction stages. And a few ideas here that we are now actively working on in the region. You may keep adding to this list. The first one is remote inspection, which was a post-COVID adaptation, which we think that remote inspections are here to stay with us. They helped us overcome accessibility, health and safety risks, helped us to lower our carbon, and also assisted our EDI because we found that we could involve more female engineers in the inspections. The second one is design for modular assembly of site construction, 3D printing, which is progressing well in our region. We started hearing about 3D printing of steel connections nowadays as well. And perhaps the easy one is to consider carbon in contractor standards and in our discussions and assessment. How do contractors deal with waste, with transportation, with decommissioning, etc.? Question and set reasonable targets. So a lot of opportunities throughout the construction stage. And if we step out of structural design, and in order to maximize our impact, there are three horizons that are important to explore. The first one is the collaboration between us, consultant, where I'm coming from, where we understand the clients and the industry demands, the academia, where young minds and researcher can bring the best innovation ideas, our contractors who will help us realize our ideas and understand how we can apply the best construction systems and the best that are adapted to our region in terms of labor skills and technology, etc. And on top of all, our governments, who, in my opinion, are the key drivers for implementation and adoption of the through the legislation. We have had numerous successes when we have combined these four arms together, and we should benefit from this in the UAE. The second one is our role as engineer. As I said earlier, it doesn't end after delivering the asset. In fact, we are more involved recently in upgrading, retrofitting structures, and in that as well, we need to reduce our carbon. And perhaps not far in the future, and as our industry progresses towards net zero, we will be exploring structural systems with net zero embodied carbon. And to get to net zero embodied carbon by 2050 for the UAE, I think this doesn't happen overnight, and we're not going to stop using cement and steel, etc. But the action really is to use our materials more efficiently by basically doing our job well. Our path towards net zero is essentially based on reducing our embodied carbon, reusing materials instead of sourcing virgin materials, and constructing using reusable material and forms which can be deassembled and reused in other buildings or other applications. This is in summary what we should be looking at, and I will conclude here. I hope these thoughts were beneficial, and I will catch up later with you at the panel discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And next we will be going one by one. So next is, one moment, let me share my screen. And next we have is, okay, sorry. Yeah, Engineer Mark Jamieson. He is the IC UAE country representative and the Middle East and Africa Council member. He currently works as the Vice President at the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia at PMK Council. So here's on to you. I will stop sharing, and Mark, it's all up to you.
Yep, thank you very much. And let me just get my sharing going. Hopefully we can get my screen up and running very quickly. Unfortunately, it's a tablet operation, so there we go. Right, okay. So on a very similar approach and note to how COP26 has shaped the way professional associations such as ours are considering the new world. Earlier in, at the tail end of 2021, the ICE issued its State of the Nation report. And normally these are quite UK centric, but this time it looked at 6 ways for civil engineers to act on climate change. So what I'm going to do is take a synopsis of that report, have a little look at the current status, the readiness of members to act, and also give you a little bit of a guide as to how we get to 2050. So as engineers, we are undoubtedly responsible for a significant proportion of the carbon that is embedded into everyday life, be it buildings, infrastructure, and indeed the way that we get ourselves around. So just putting that into context, currently around 70% of all CO2 emissions are linked to infrastructure. And likewise, in the UK, 54% of its greenhouse gases are similarly attributable. Year on year, so far, the UK has managed to reduce its CO2 emissions by about 3%. So if we carry on with that rate, we will miss the 2050 target. But where we have had a difference is where we've been able to get the greatest influence. So both in capital and operational carbon emissions, those have come down by around 44%. And what we've then done this year, or sorry, within the last year, is to have a look at how members are operating and what we can do to make a difference. And included in that is the fact that there is clearly a need to drive the net zero agenda. The IC president for the 2020 to 2021 session was Rachel Skinner, and she made this very much the forefront of her presidential address and her presidential year. But what we also found in this is there is still a lack of connectivity between engineers, professional associations, and the wider public. And undoubtedly, and I think this is something most of you will have found, is that we get bound by client briefs, deadlines, and budgets. And in this region particularly, what that means is we end up being bound by our lowest common denominator, capital cost. But what we found more encouraging was that personal efforts are quite high amongst the engineering fraternity, and particularly amongst the professional engineers. Often inspired by their children and documentaries, people are going out of their way to change their habits, drive electric cars, maybe a hybrid, reduce the amount of time that they take, maybe sometimes reduce a bit of travel, change their diets. Where they have found it more challenging is undoubtedly in the professional environment. But there already exists a number of best practice examples that are worth identifying, be they mobility hubs, encouraging active travel, and that means going to work or to your school or going to the shops by foot, going for a run, taking a scooter, riding your bike. All those and there are some really interesting examples of how that's changed behavior with a little bit of engineering design and a lot of community engagement. But undoubtedly, what as Iman also touched on, we have to adapt technology, and that is going to bring us to the net zero agenda a lot faster. So what are the 6 ways for us as engineers to act? Well, here they are. First of all, this is an emergency, so treat it like one. Secondly, bring carbon into every conversation that you have. Thirdly, understand and influence end users. And we're not talking about clients here. We're talking about the general public, the buyers of the villas that we build, the buyers of the hotels that we refurbish. Design and build for the right outcomes. Strive for creative solutions, and equally be responsible for resilience. Because without doubt, whilst we are striving to achieve a 1.5 degree limit by 2050, that path is going to be very tough, very hard, and not without its bumps. Therefore, we have to be ready to defend against those climate events that ultimately will have an impact on society at large. So a little bit more detail. Number 1, this is an emergency, so treat it like one. We as engineers have been around for thousands of years to help when there have been floods, wildfires, people have been displaced, there's been a need for sanitation or water supply. Most of which we've seen happen quite regularly and alarmingly, increasingly in the last few years. And we're well placed to respond to these emergency situations. But are we aware that there are over 2,000 jurisdictions representing 1 billion citizens in 35 countries that have declared a climate emergency, and they want our help? So what can you do? You as an individual and as a professional engineer can understand the science and communicate the urgency to everyone you work with. Understand carbon declarations or commitments that your organization or your clients make. Understand and show how you're contributing to solving the crisis. And join a local collective working to create change. So we come on to bringing carbon into the conversation. When we polled our members, we found that 15% of them only always consider climate issues within their solutions. 22% felt they were limited by a lack of knowledge. But how many of us, when we're having conversations with our clients or our teams, talk about what are the carbon implications? And we should be considering it not just in the capital cost of us building concrete buildings, but also in how our buildings and facilities and assets are used. And there are examples out there already of how to cut carbon at all stages of an asset's life without adding costs. And this is ultimately the examples that our clients need to see and hear about. But who here online is aware of PAS 2080, the carbon management and infrastructure? Have we started to do enough research ourselves and bring ourselves up to speed and knowledge of what is required? Equally, if we're past the design stage, look at how carbon can be implemented during the construction stage, or carbon reduction can be implemented through the construction stage, or even during operation and use. What we will see over the coming years, that the ESG, environmental, social, and governance auditing is coming to the fore. So more and more corporate clients will start changing their obligations that they're setting on their projects, and therefore the carbon question undoubtedly will be in every conversation. But what do you need to do now? Fundamentally, it's about refusing to do business as usual. You've got to keep carbon reduction on every project agenda. You've got to keep yourself informed about how approaches to the climate crisis are evolving. But ultimately, look for the best examples of good practice. See out those gaps in your own knowledge and exchange ideas. And be willing to share your success, be it big or small. So when it comes to the end users, how can we make a difference? Well, there's something called the nudge technique, making it easy, attractive, social, and timely. So a couple of examples. In London, cyclists were struggling to get across Blackfriars Bridge, but when a protected lane was built, the usage of that lane meant that cyclists using the bridge increased by 55%. In Bromley, most of the children were taken to school by car or bus, but by widening a highway bridge to include a dedicated footpath and cycle track, there was a 51% increase in active travel. So we can edit the environment and we can change behaviors, but to be successful, we must engage the community. So what do you need to do now? Acknowledge that your work has an impact on people's behavior. Know who your end users are and involve them by treating them as experts. Consider the needs of everyone affected by infrastructure and engage them. And understand those easy, attractive, social, timely principles and apply them to your work. So designing and building for the right outcomes was our fourth way for us to be able to act now to make a difference. And there is, again, some good examples. Anglian Water, which is part of the Project 13 early adopters, have managed to decrease their capital carbon by 61% since adopting an alliance model on Project 13 principles. The potential return on investment for Belfast City at Consmortar Community Greenway is around 600%, just because they became and used an outcome-focused approach. What is it? It's a 9-kilometre linear park that links their residents to their parks, businesses, shops, and schools. In other words, it fundamentally increases the level of active travel that people can do in a safe, secure environment without having to get in their car or get on a bus or use some form of potentially polluting transportation. And then by taking an outcomes-based approach to consider ways of impacting demand as well as supply, you can make a difference. And if you don't know about it, get on the web and find out about Project 13. It has 5 pillars and 16 principles, and it fundamentally says that the types of contract that we get into here, which are FIDIC-based transactional models, don't work, particularly not for infrastructure. Rather, we need to look at a collaborative and enterprise model that is an integrated approach and outcomes-based delivery. So to act now, you need to understand and apply what an outcome-focused approach is, for example, by using the Project 13 principles. Define the outcomes you want and make low carbon behavior one of those outcomes. Where possible, implement, promote, or suggest a commercial model that incentivizes outcome-based solutions, and make your infrastructure, whether it's creating a new asset or operating an existing system, work harder to achieve multiple outcomes. Number 5 is to strive for creative solutions. And again, a couple of examples. So again, by looking at how to reuse and rework a bridges project, there was a saving of 3,200 strengthening anchors, all new assets that would otherwise have gone into the ground, and with it, a lot of carbon as well. In another example, a wastewater treatment plant was basically abandoned because it wasn't needed. And the reason it wasn't needed is that all that they had to do was increase the levels of phosphorus that were removed to existing ones. So there's a solution we didn't need to build. We just needed to do something and engineer a different solution. So be solution agnostic when approaching a problem. Do you really need a new asset, or can you reuse or reconfigure what you've got? And how to act? Be prepared to be radical. Learn how to reuse and adapt existing infrastructure. Understand how infrastructure is a complex system of systems. Understand, quantify, and seek to mitigate whole life carbon impacts, and consider climate change in every project. And most importantly of all, define yourself not by what you build, but by what you achieve. So finally, the last point is about resilience. And again, some examples. Currently, in Thailand, 10% of the citizens are at risk of inundation if there's no changes between now and 2050. That means their land will go underwater. They will lose everything. London currently has flood risks affecting 25% of its rail stations, 50% of its hospitals. On the other hand, the Orkney Islands now produces more renewable energy than the islands can actually use in any one day. And yet also in Paris, if some of the flood risks were realized through the continued impact of climate change, then the majority of businesses will be affected not directly by the flooding, but by the loss of infrastructure associated with it. So what do you need to do? Consider the total impact and value of your project. For example, what effect a project may have on the resilience of other nearby infrastructure. Adopt a systems approach, a Project 13 approach to infrastructure delivery. Understand that it is in the early stages of the design process that we can have the most influence on resilience by identifying the right location and getting the conceptual design spot on. And stress test your plans with respect to a wide range of possible climate extremes that we could see in the future. And be clear to analyze what your system can and can't resist. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. It was really very insightful, giving the practical experiences. And we have the next speaker this evening is from the Society of Engineers, UAE, Dr. Ghanim Kashwani. He is the academic researcher in civil engineering, New York University, Abu Dhabi. And he is also a PhD in civil engineering and a chartered member and chartered environmental manager, and also holding some graduate IOSH certification. Here's on to you.
Thank you. I just need a little bit of a minute to fix my screen. Hopefully I can share it with you guys. Let me know once you can see it.
Yeah.
Let me see if I'm using. Is it clear?
Yes, we can see that. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so I have a 20 minutes. I have a timer. I will start it now. First of all, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, salatu wassalam ala ashrafil muslimin Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Thanks a lot for the opportunity. It is such a pleasure to be with you. Today I'm presenting the System Engineer in UAE. I see many familiar names here. People have been privileged to work with them. My name is Ghanem Kashwani, and I am a board director member of Society of Engineers. So today we'll talk about the co-op that happened recently in Glasgow, and one of my favorite countries, Scotland. And let's discuss what a Society of Engineers and what have been done to follow up about what the UAE is doing. So, okay. So I like to start with history as usual. So in year 2000, we have something called Millennium Development Goals. So every 15 years, we put some new goals to achieve. And we have, these simple one. It was not the 17. It was less than that. As you can see, it was only 8. And did we achieve it? So when I went back to the literature review, not really we achieved it all, but we did some progress yet. So then they said we can see the word here in sustainability, and we have something called Sustainable Development Goals. So now we have a new chart, a new goals to achieve, and these are the 17. As engineer Iman, engineer Mark, they said that it is mainly to the infrastructure and civil engineers, and maybe later engineer Mark and Professor Sabih, they will discuss more why ICE now they have new chartered status had been discussed. It's called chartered infrastructure, because now we talk about the whole infrastructure. And this is, I think, very important that we have this status now to talk and its role to tackle the climate change. So as you can see, we have this 17. But in my view now, I think both in Millennium and Sustainable Goal, there is a very beautiful word. Engineer Iman said it, resilience. For me as Ghanem, my favorite 3 words are read, research, resilience. And I think resilience is such a beautiful word. And I believe the next one, the United Nations, they should involve them in the sustainability. So this is another figure how we can see it. Sometimes it's hard for us to see it, to understand it. As engineer, we like things to be in group. So I like this way, like a flower. We have what we do for the society, individual, biodiversity, climate. And as I said, it is 17 goal, around 169 aim to achieve. And mainly it is in the infrastructure. And ironically, that most of the CO2 emissions that happen is due to the bad management of civil engineers, yet this gives the opportunity to fix it, because we know how what it causes, so we can go to the root cause analysis and we figure it out. So I like this, it's called resilience. Is it the new sustainability? And mark my word, it will be resilience. It will become the next buzzword, because resilience have a component like absorb the shock, recover and rebound, and this is what happened to our infrastructure in the pandemic. Now with the COVID-19, it was such a shock for us, but if we have resilient infrastructure, we can absorb it. And infrastructure, we are not talking about only buildings, we talk about also the surfaces. So let me put it in a simple way, what's sustainability and resilience? It is very simple diagram, but it's explained exactly. So from resilience to sustainability, it is the capacity over time and face disruption, but sustainability to resilience, the capacity to preserve the system in the long run. So, and this is, in my humble opinion, I believe adding resilience is very, very important if we want to talk about climate change. Without the word resilient, it's really hard to solve and mitigate the climate change. So are we preaching what we are practicing or not? So the most countries are emitted right now is most of the country are developed country, China, US, Europe country, because we're emitting a lot of CO2. So it is a good news. I'm a very optimistic guy. So if we emit it, we know how to solve it. UK was the first country that announced to be carbon neutral to achieve in 2019. UAE, they just announced it after COP, and then Saudi Arabia, they announced. So there is much awareness about carbon neutral, or in Arabic, al-hayad al-munakhi. So what net zero? Net zero, we have the carbon emission here, but on the other side, we need to balance it, okay? Net zero, carbon is not the enemy. And I usually tell my students, it is not the enemy, it's how to deal with it. So we have carbon sequestration. This is one thing that we can do it right now, or renewable energy. And it completes each other. Sometimes we need to start things from zero, renewable energy, and sometimes we need to store the CO2 and better utilize it. So after COP26, first of all, we are very happy that UAE will host COP28 and 27. I think it will be in Egypt. We announced something called hydrogen roadmap and leadership, and I believe hydrogen, it will be the new economic. There is something called hydrogen economy. It will be, and now this roadmap has been announced, and it will be soon published in the government website. So let's tackle what hydrogen. We have green, blue, black, gray, brown hydrogen, but our main focus in the green hydrogen, it is from renewable hydrogen. Last week, we have a nice lecture that still we are a hydrocarbon country and doesn't make sense that I don't utilize the hydrocarbon pocket that I have it. But I remember Professor Hassan, he said the word balance, how we can balance, doesn't mean that I abandon all what I have, doesn't make any sense. So I can turn my hydrocarbon to black, gray, and brown, and blue hydrogen. And somehow it will work better because you cannot disabandon it, because the word sustainability has an economic pillar that we cannot ignore it. So what the second element that UAE government they did something called circular economy. And UAE circular economy, it is the one unique economy council in the GCC country. And they want to shift from the linear economic to the circular economy. There is many, if you go to the economist, I have discussed that with many economists. And I was saying, you know what, I read a lot of literature review, tell me what's the best one. There is nothing called the best one, because circular economy, we talk about the volume and the movement. Sometimes circular economy, if the movement was too much in it, I mean, the production, then it will be our enemy. So we need how you utilize it. But as a framework, circular economy is one of the good economy. There is another economy have been developed by a researcher. She's from Oxford University called donut economy. Yet it is, and you can find it in many academic paper talk it. It is also a good economy to be applied to support the sustainability. So let's explain what the difference between linear and circular economy. Linear economy, or in Arabic الاقتصاد الخطي, we start with natural resource, take, make, use, and then we put a waste. This is the usual one. But in circular economy, there is no waste. And we always start with the raw material. Since I am a fan of cement and concrete, please highlight the raw materials, because I believe that everything starts from the materials. And you can see that the loop is keep going there. And sometimes people, they hear the word recycling. Recycling is a beautiful word, but, we have better word to use. Engineer Markey said we can reuse before it. So because recycling, there is some energy we are putting. This energy, we can utilize it. So there is a hidden energy or hidden cost in recycling. Yeah, it is better definitely than dumping or consumption, better items, but there is many stages before recycling. Recycling should be not our first option. So let's focus now on circular economy. So we know the difference in this slide, this focus. So first of all, we take the material. I prefer to take it from sustainable sources. For example, we have timber. Now we have something called cross-laminate timber. They have a sustainable forest for it. So I don't need to go to the usual forest and cut a tree that cannot grow. So I start in it. So there is, as I said, you go all the way before the consumption. I make sure that I can reform, reduce, reuse, collection. Then the last step is recycle, okay, with minimum waste. And by the way, the word waste, it is the invention from the human race. And you can see from the nature, I like the art of biomimicry, التقليد الأحيائي. There is no waste there. Everything is utilized. So by biomimicry, we need to understand that we can have zero waste as much as we can. So a couple of definition we need to know. The big picture that we live is built environment. Then we have another layer called infrastructure. So built environment, it is infrastructure plus the land use. Then we have infrastructure, and it consists of building and transportation, and the core is construction material. So we need to do development from the construction material that it will be a very sustainable. So Society of Engineers, and I believe also ICE, ISRAC, we deal with Harriet Watt. In Dubai, they did a marvelous job by creating a center of excellence in smart construction. And we're really doing a marvelous job in creating a sustainable way, especially in the cement. And I believe also Professor Sabah, definitely he with us and the board member there. And that group, they create a roadmap of UAE cement decarbonization. They have been talked with the ministry, with the previous minister, His Excellency Dr. Abdullah Bilhaif, with the current minister, Her Excellency Mariam Harb. So there is now some work we are doing in material. So we have now the first option, we talk hydrogen economy. We talk about circular economy. Now we use a cement decarbonization. So this 3 new initiatives that UAE and Society of Engineers are involved in all these, either by practical way or by advisory role. The Cement Decarbonization Delivery Group and Harriet Watt, they play different role, like from the leadership to the awareness, to work with the government and private sector. And I salute them for their hard work, and I believe we can reach somewhere there, because cement by itself, as you know, it is 8%, almost 8% of emission from cement, 9% by steel, 11% by plastic. These are the 3 most dangerous material or hazardous material, let's say it like this, that emitted CO2 emission. And the percentage that we build and cement, or it is like the second material used after water, that we build the whole New York City every month, the whole like Manhattan, Brooklyn, every month in the world for the next 40 years. Another initiative that I really like it also in the Environment Ministry, it's called Emirate RDF. It is reviews derived fuel. And if you put it recently, also in Indonesia, they are using this. So they try to get fuel from the waste, and they put it again to operate some factory, especially cement factory. Because now for the cement, how we can reduce the CO2, either by changing the material and the clinker, or the fossil fuel that you put it to burn it, or to do the operation called clinization. And in this, we can use hydrogen cell. This is another option, or we use the RDF impact. They have a website, and it is government-private collaboration. Now, this is RDF, and I'll talk about 3D printing, how it is important. Dubai considered the first Arab city, city that have regulation now. Now, if I want to build in 3D printing, I can go to Dubai Municipality and I get the NOC to build, because they have regulation. And I believe Engineer Iman, he said the role of regulation important. I have the technology, I have the resource, but I don't have the regulation. And by the way, the first building have been ever, it was Dubai Academy Future in Dubai. But in that moment, there was no regulation. So they didn't register it as a building, they registered it as something else. So this is what we need to do. We have a regulation that support the technology like 3D printing. Now digital twin, people, they're starting. And I believe also Engineer University mentioned BIM. Now in Dubai Municipality, they ask for BIM model. But for different Emirates now, the awareness, thanks God, is starting. Now, still, like in Abu Dhabi, they don't ask for BIM, but they're starting. So digitizing is important. Digitizing, decarbonization, and decentralize. Decentralize, we need, this is the 3D. We need to get our self-energy, and instead of getting from the power station, because 80–90% of our power station, it is only for building and cooling building. So we need another source, so that will be decentralized for the main energy power station in UAE. Okay, I published this in a conference paper. It is a small equation that how we can tackle the challenge of climate change. We remember positive water security, because by far the most important topic for all GCC country in academic anything is water security. And many books, they predict that, God forbid, if there is any war, it will be in the water. So positive water, zero waste by circular economy, and negative carbon by decarbonation. So simple equation, positive water, zero waste, negative carbon. In the end, I want to advise to read the last book for Bill Gates, How to Avoid a Climate Disaster. He has like a special chapter for cement, a special chapter for fossil fuel. And I like his quoting. I wrote this book because I don't just see the problem of climate change, also I see the opportunity to solve it. Believe me, Bill Gates didn't pay me anything to do a advertisement for him. I wish if he can pay me, but it is a real book that I advise you to read it. By this, I thank you all and welcome to your question. Thank you.
Yeah, it was really very insightful, and I guess we have learned a lot through this. And last, we have the speaker that is from the Institution of Mechanical Engineers, Dr. Nasir Al-Lagda. He is a bachelor's in chemical engineering, also master's and PhD, and he is currently the program director of studies of chemical engineering and in the global sustainability engineering at the Heriot-Watt. So here's on the platform to you, Dr. Nasir.
Thank you very much. I might be a wee bit more into the academia, so my presentation might slide to be more, I don't like to be like teaching, but I would like to revisit some of the concepts that we use a lot lately, and especially with the COP26 when it happened, and we definitely we heard all the concept of sustainability, sustainable development, climate change and stuff. So I thought maybe if we just revisit some of these concepts, and I hope you can see my slides.
Yes, it's visible.
And look to it into the perspective in engineering, general engineering, not just mechanical or chemical, where we are looking for if we can now move into sustainable processing. So one of the first, when we start talking about sustainable and we start noticing the problems, environmental problems at the start, the people start talking about paradigm shift. We need to move our thinking or our doing from some whatever we are doing from one concept to another. And Dr. Ghanem mentioned it very, very nicely when he talked about linear economy to circular economy. Like one of the most used notions is waste, and in real life, we should not say waste anymore. Any waste should be considered as unused resources. And that's where circular economy is talking about. And that's one of the ideas about these shifts. And of course, the most famous picture is what used by Thomas Kahn is it duck or is it rabbit? So if we can just change the way we are looking into a process, we might change it from a duck to a rabbit. So we are actually moving. However, because we are living in communities and around the world, and especially with the social media and with what we hear in the news, unfortunately, sometimes we start believing the models and the results of the modelings are actually representing the concept or representing the problem instead of looking actually at the physical thing itself. Unfortunately, when we are talking about climate change, we are talking about how we can reduce carbon emissions so we can keep the temperature increased by 2 degrees or 1.5 degrees Celsius and so on. And all that is based on, as we know, in models that is expecting how the carbon emissions will be in the next 10, 20, 30 years. And also we are building our policies around the same concept as how we can achieve net or zero emissions by 2030, 40, or 50. Because at the end, we are looking at, and when we are dealing with concepts like that as a group thinkers, or we are thinking as a group. And even when we are discussing or we are trying to get to a decision, it has to be done a group. It is effective in some ways, and sometimes it might be ineffective. Okay, we cannot guarantee that as a group we are always reaching the right or the correct answer. And of course, the most important thing is our assumptions. Is when we are joining any debate, we already have our assumptions. Okay, so even every word affects our imagination. The minute we hear carbon capture, it might, for me as a chemical engineering, I right away go into chemical absorption or physical absorption or adsorption. If I'm hearing carbon storage, I start thinking where we are storing the carbon, under the sea, or so how can I reach these high pressures and so on. So we start imagining depending on our experience, because I might be teaching this course involving in a research on these topics. So that's where my imagination take me, and start making my actions, my decision based on these assumptions. And I think it sometimes is risky. So, but fortunately, during today's event, we have seen that actually most of the panelists are looking at the big picture. They are not saying there is only single solution. They are looking at many initiatives, many like roadmaps that can achieve our final goals in sustainable development. So now, when we are talking about sustainability, by definition, it should be a continuous process. It will not stop. Okay, all the time we should aim for more and more sustainable process. Even if we talk about sustainable well-being, sustainable health, sustainable integrity, and so on. So in definition, if we are talking about sustainable development, we want a development that has the capacity to continue in recent and also in the future generation. Because at the end of the day, development is what we all can do to improve our lot. Now, unfortunately, when we start thinking about developing our lot, our thinking was linear. And that's what led to the linear economy, is we want to conserve the life of, for example, the Roman elite in the Roman Empire. We need then find some way of maybe start colonization. Maybe if we are looking for colonization, we need to build ships. So that means we will start cutting the trees in Italy hills, all right? And the same thing, we are trying to get nutrients, raw materials from different around the world. So we start getting this linear idea that if we have inputs, we process them to get outputs. But how we are getting these inputs, we don't know. How we are, what will happen at the end of the life of our products, we don't know. No, that's traditionally how we used to do it. And that's why most of our economy is still in that linear process. We are extracting nutrients from the environment, and then we are doing whatever we want to do to get to produce goods and services. But unfortunately, when we are doing that, we are producing waste that is all fed into the environment. And in the olden days, the people believe that environment has endless capacity of taking waste, carbon emissions, greenhouse gases, whatever, like wastewater and so on. Unfortunately, we didn't learn the hard truth that Earth cannot keep absorbing all these waste. And that's what we start thinking about, how we can solve this problem. So that's, if we want to simplify the linear economy, is simpler: take, make, use, discard. Get raw materials, process it, produce a product, and then just discard it. But unfortunately, as you can see, it's creating a lot of waste. Also, one of the most important thing, and this is one of the topics I'm very interested in it recently, is what happens after using, for example, wind turbines, when we are doing decommission of wind turbines. What happens when we do decommissions of solar parks? Is it still considered sustainable, environment friendly, or actually we are creating a problem? Okay, so this is one of the things is, are we actually selling it as renewable energy, but we are still getting raw materials to make solar panels, we use them to produce renewable energy, but then we discard them. So this is also, we need to look at the way we are thinking about renewable energy into more sustainable way. So because of this legacy of take, make, use, and discard, we were all the time interested in enhancing our economy, increasing the gross national product. So the economy was the driving force of our development. But we start noticing there are problems. So we start taking one problem, try to find one solution for it. And then when we notice that we might not be able to solve all these problems, we start thinking about a trade-off. What if I can replace 10% of the energy of my process by renewable energy? Can I be considered now sustainable? How about the carbon emissions? Can I do a trade-off between different countries? Is it the right way or not? That's a big debate. So, for example, in history, one of the first big pollution problems was the smoke and fog. So how we can solve it? Then I remember when I start being interested in environment when I was at school, the big topic was acid rain. It's SOx and NOx, and how can you deal with them? And then it came the big, of course, before that was the ozone depletion, and then was the big topic that all of us are talking about, it's climate change, mainly CO2. So we are dealing with it, one problem, one solution, okay? And unfortunately, all the environmental management strategy, either by country levels or companies in maybe in the 80s or the 90s, was looking into finding a solution for one problem. Because that is how we used to do it as a company. Have a new process, implement it, see how is it happening. If there is a problem, let's measure it, let's find what actually the causes, let's change whatever we can change, or create a new process to solve this pollution problem, and let's continue. That's ultimately is ineffective, and we all agree that most of the problems we are facing now and all these big issues we are facing because of this way of thinking. Because at the end of the day, we have what we call the business dilemma. All the time, economics is the driving force. So we are building more industry. We are creating more processes to increase the profit. So we are increasing our GNP. However, we are living in environment and ecological system, and these are putting constraints, either by environmental constraints, as we are know about, for example, global warming or ozone depletion or whatever. And also because of that, the government, they start putting legislation. So the dilemma is, how can I continue making a profit, but at the same time, I'm meeting the legislation and the constraints? So how we can do? That's where actually we start seeing the recycling economy. We moved from linear to cycling or recycling economy, which is most of our economic system now is recycling. But as Dr. Ghanem mentioned it, sometimes recycling might consume more energy than actually what we consumed in producing that product. So how we can do that? Unfortunately, we forget that any business is an organism. It has its own life, its own system, okay, that needs, you know, to develop. But at the same time, as any living organisms, we have the constraints of the surroundings, and that's why we start doing a trade-off. Okay, so we want to think about whatever way we can do some trade-off, either by maybe legislation is developing, so I need to change my process. So let me see if how I can use renewable energy, how I can do recycling of the end of life of my product, and so on. And that's, to be honest with you, most of our system, our industries that looking at. But is it the right way? Unfortunately, it's not. So most of the time, people are saying sustainable development is how can we deal with the human impacts on global climate change, okay, in terms of sustainability. So we need to start thinking about biodiversity depletion, pollution, but at the same time, we need to look at the global inequality, poverty, and so on. But we need at the same time the economy to keep going forward. We need to make more profit. And that's, some people, they debate that actually the 17 goals is coming from this idea of sustainable development. We are trying to solve some problems. We write problems, either environmental problem or social problems, but at the same time, we need to build up economy. And that's why when we talk about sustainability, we talk about the three pillars: society, economy, and environment. However, if we want to achieve an actual sustainable development, we don't need to do that balance between the three pillars. Actually, our goal should be all the time that we are meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generation to meet their own needs. And needs is the big title. Now, what is needs? It differs. Some people, the need, there are basic needs, food, shelter, and so on. But for some people is actually, I need decent internet connection. That's considered needs for some people, especially now with the pandemic and we are doing online teaching and stuff. That's one of the basic needs now for the students. Or we are now actually having an online meeting. So if the internet is not decent, we cannot do such an event. So this is also one of the big issues. What are actually the needs of a society? So as an engineer, we need to find the mechanism to implement this sustainable development where we are achieving the needs of the present without compromising the future. Okay, so if we do that, means our sustainability will be continuous in terms of development. So we need to stop thinking of sustainability as a balance between three pillars and actually look at as needs, meeting the needs of the present and the future. So how can we do that? We need now to look into our company as inputs and outputs still, but we need also to see how we are interacting with the environment, with the surrounding. We should not just see as we are. But if you notice in this slide, we already included need satisfaction. So it can be any type of operation, either industrial or not industrial satisfaction. But unfortunately, we still have negative impacts. So if we want to have a practical conclusion for such sustainable development, we should not look into plastic as a process where end of pipe exercise. My plastic, I already used the bottle, how I can recycle it or reuse it. No, from the start, when I'm designing my plastic bottles, I should think about it as a sustainable process where there is no need for this plastic bottle to be considered as waste. And that's where circular economy is very, very important. So if we think of the word in general, okay, and this is similar to Dr. Ghanem, maybe it was slightly in the specific industry, but any process, okay, it has to be run by a company where the economics is contributing, but any company is part of a society, but the society is surrounded by ecological structures and natural structures. Now, if we think about it as inner circles like that, okay, it might think about where is the waste or where is the goods and bads happening. But if we put it into like what we call a linear, okay, where we are starting from the solar exergy, where all our energy resources coming, their source is the sun that goes to the globe. Then we have our ecosystems, United Arab Emirates, wherever we are living, like Dubai is like our ecosystem. Then there are our social environment, company and process, and so on. Now, if we look at it as this way, which is cradle to grave also, we are not just thinking about it. I have oil, let me make chemicals of it. Where I'm getting my oil? How I can make sure that I am using my fossil fuels in a sustainable way? Also, how I am using my renewable energy in sustainable way by reducing any negative side effects. So the way we are looking into sustainable development, unfortunately, as balance between three pillars, sometimes it's unclear, okay? And the same thing about sustainability. We think about it as sustainability in the construction industry, sustainability in chemical industries, right? We need to think about it in all these construction industry, chemical industry, all these are meeting the needs of the present, but also they should meet the needs of the future, okay? So we need to move from the three pillars, okay, to the, what we call it, our common future definition, okay? So that's what we need to move in. So that means we need to start creating strategies. We need to center on processes and activities. We need to create strategies to take the whole cradle to grave. And we already saw some of the examples here today. So that means when we are taking each step of this process, there are some steps that might be unsustainable and how we can address that. We need to think about resource availability infringement. When we are talking about sustainability criteria, let's stop talking about it as negative side effects or waste, okay? They are infringement. If we move to circular economy, we should actually minimize any infringement in our resources availability, okay? We should aim for a zero RAs, okay, in any business. We are talking about it, and we start thinking about total sustainability management. And one of the famous structures that is used around the world is ISO 14001. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope you found some of what I said is interesting. Thank you.
Yes, it was really very insightful, and we have definitely learned a lot from all of our speakers. And so we begin with our main panel discussions, and these will be the small 4 questions, and we would just move around the way we followed with our speakers. So we start with the ISTRUCT, then the IC, and then the Society of Engineers, and then IMECI. So here's my first question. Do you think the COP26 was successful?
Is it to me, Pandit?
Yeah, it's for you.
Okay, yeah, that's the golden question, huh? So, well, if we look at at the giant leap forward towards limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees, then I think the answer is that the COP has failed. So the overwhelming feeling coming from businesses, climate experts, is that COP fell short of what's needed. And there was probably still a lack of finance for developing countries. This remains an obstacle to progress actions towards the world's most vulnerable people, I think. However, and the COP26 was successful if we look at the major steps forward made towards key climate change issues. I think the current commitment is put us on anything between 1.8 to 2.5 degrees, depending which analysis you review. We've got around 90% of global GDP now covered by net zero targets, which is great. So in all, in my opinion, significant gaps remain, Rependeep. However, true change is happening, and we must build our capacity and skills and progress on our innovation and digital capabilities and collaborate to put climate change at the core of everything we do.
I would agree with you on this particular aspect that it started with the 2015 climate Paris Agreement of having, it was speculated that it would be every year the increase of temperature would be 1.5 degrees, but it came out to be, with the recent one, it came out to be at 2.7. So even the scientists are very surprised to say that how far it got so soon, and it's too late, you know, and it requires immediate action. Yeah, here's on to you, Mark.
Thank you, Ripandeep. I think that part of the difficulty with defining success in this is that it's an ongoing process. So, you know, it really isn't just in the week of intense sort of discussions and promotions, but rather what happens to it and also what happens in terms of influence. So, you know, it was interesting to see that the COP president was just reported to be in Egypt and indeed the UAE as we speak. So I don't think one can necessarily, you know, define it as a success or failure. And I mean, and Iman's right. There are absolute successes within it, but there are also disappointments. We don't yet have the level of commitment from countries that are the biggest polluters. So I think ultimately it's a little bit of suck and see what happens next. But I think what it does do, and where therefore there is an element of success, is it continues to drive the climate emergency agenda up in not only political terms, but also in terms of wider societal changes. And, you know, I think the more that continues to actually embed itself, the more likely all of these COPs will end up being a reasonable success, because we'll actually get somewhere. Because the reality is the alternative is pretty horrendous.
I agree on this aspect that the major countries were the pollutants, such as the US and the China, they refused to sign in the COP26. So that was a big of a surprise, and that was really much of the expectancy that they would definitely sign in. But anyhow, we will definitely move on to this one. How about your opinion, Dr. Ghanem?
Thanks all. First of all, thanks for the attendee that they stay with us. And first of all, I need to agree with engineer Mark. We are in emergency climate change. And I just sent in the chat box 6 days ago, World Economic Forum, they shared the Global Risk Report of 2022. And it's a very important report. And figure 1, that on page 24, it says the people threat in their life. And you can say that the climate change is still one of the top 3, but also we talk about social cohesion, we talk about economic recovery. Here are the things that, but sometimes people, they said, you know what, we have things, our priority now is about the economic recovery and about social cohesion, about pandemic. Then I will take care about climate change, but what can they see behind the curtain is related. Please go inside this report. By solving climate change, you are solving other problems. And as I said, ICE, they put a nice term of structure called chartered infrastructure. Maybe Mark, you want to, or Professor Sabih talk about it, that it is not only about civil engineers, it is about the whole infrastructure. And this is what when you say, is it successful? Yes, it was successful on highlight the challenge that we have is holistic challenge. But now to continue the success story, then we have another journey. And it involves everybody. Today in my presentation, I present what UAE have been doing as from hydrogen, from alternative cement, from circular economy, from 3D printing. But yet we have many opportunity. There's things we need to act as now, but also open other doors. We talk about biomaterials, for example. It's one of the solutions, but we can invest. But there's things that we need to take action now. And I think this is how we can answer the question about the adaptation of Paris Agreement, that we need to do that, the resilience that we have, and then see ahead as forecasting for the future. Thank you.
Yeah, yes, more or less with the net carbon zero, with the 2050 achievement, it's net carbon zero is not exactly what the word that we have to go to the carbon zero, but the emissions should match with the environment, that it doesn't do the harm. And Dr. Nasir, what are your thoughts on it?
Thank you very much. I agree with all the comments, and yes, it's not total success, it's not total failure, and at the end of the day, we are talking about politics where you need to reach some compromise. But I think there were like some good points, especially in the measurements. I think one of the issues we were facing is actually how we are measuring, for example, carbon emissions or the trade-offs, or actually are people following it. Also, I think it was very important that developing countries to have a saying. It's unfair that the developed countries now, they already reach maybe the mature of their industries, and they are the ones who caused all these problems, and then now they are telling the developing countries, no, you cannot have this type of industry or that type of industry, and so on. So I think at the end of the day is the compromise that all of us should reach, and we start thinking out of the box. So we need also to see what is the technology is actually providing us, and see actually if we can use it in sustainable way. For example, like the green hydrogen, or how we can use any of our waste in like the circular economy as a new resources, and so on. So yeah, I think, yeah, this is very important. And here I think the research and the academia are they are very, very important to get more and more involved in these topics, and also using all the social media, all the ways that to educate the people about that act, because unfortunately some people think the solution are already existing, but the politicians or the governments don't want to use it. No, there are still loads of limitation on the existing technology, okay, to achieve all these goals. So it should be also communicated very well, especially with the young generations, because these young generation, I believe everybody heard when the elections in Germany, the majority of the young generation, their main priority for electing was the elections was the global warming, so, and the climate change. So this is very important to communicate all the, as I said, all the definitions, all the existing facts with all young generation. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and also that when we call upon the policies that are being made by the government, the big challenge relies in the businesses. When you have a business setup wherein you have the business objectives and you have the profit margins, and suddenly some new regulations or the policies come into picture, and this has to be changed. It cannot be changed overnight, especially for the industries or the manufacturing sector. So this poses a very big challenge. So having a system and then changing it overnight is a big challenge. So it cannot be termed as whether it was successful or not, but then yes, we are getting somewhere rather than getting nowhere. And we have our next question that is can nuclear power ever be green? Iman, on you.
Yeah, I think this is a good question for IMAC. But from my perspective, I think nuclear energy is certainly a zero emission energy source. Its footprint is small and it produces minimal waste. However, from what I understand, the extraction of the uranium is quite energy intensive from the burning of the fossil fuels, obviously. From what I learned recently on this is that a nuclear plant recovery time is around about 10 to 18 years, which means that for the plant to build, it requires a decade before the plant, the energy used to build and fuel the plant has been recovered to start produce net energy. This compares with only 1 year of recovery for wind and less than 3 years for solar PV energy, which is quite impressive, the difference. And I think the waste of nuclear plant is always an issue in warming up the oceans. So perhaps we need maybe more studies on the whole life cycle of nuclear energy plants. And maybe progress further towards managing the waste and the health impacts, which is already ongoing. Yeah.
Yeah, and we have a very good example of the one nuclear power plant here in the UAE, in the Abu Dhabi, right? If I'm not wrong, it's already functional, and the first phase or part 1 has already been commissioned, and it's already working. Mark, on your thoughts.
Yeah, so I think on the nuclear power equation, there's lots of debates about this, and clearly one of the bigger issues is about decommissioning of the plants, as well as the safety of older ones. But certainly the more modern nuclear plant on the big scale is one that I think is now coming very much to the fore, and we can see that in places like France and even the UK, and obviously the one in the UAE is up there with being one of the most recent and most modern ones to deliver energy on a long-term basis. I think the challenge that we have, and it was Dr. Nabir's presentation where he says that even when we've got wind energy and even solar energy, what do we do with the panels? What do we do with the turbines? What do we do with the blades when they're finished? And if they're only going to be up for 3 years, whereas a nuclear plant is, could be 25, 30, 40 years, what's that return? And I think often we don't have that debate. But I think where nuclear is really interesting is what's currently happening with Rolls-Royce led sort of the micro plants, if you like, the ability to look at a better form of manufacturing, I think that has huge potential, which initially will probably supplement what already exists, but ultimately has the ability, I think, to if it proves successful, I think it's transformational when it comes to delivery of energy. Obviously, then the broader debate is ultimately about the other type of nuclear power energy, which is the ones we ascertain as being just like star power, which won't help us in terms of our goals for 2050, but ultimately does look like it's starting to get some level of traction where before it didn't. So will nuclear be forever part of the equation? I would say yes. What do we need to do to make it more sustainable? Definitely there's still work to be done there.
There's a lot of research that needs to be done, and it calls upon the academics and the researchers to work on it, I guess.
Yeah.
So I will leave this to Dr. Ghanim's views then.
Thanks a lot. So first of all, let me explain the landscape of nuclear power here in UAE. We have the construction company we called INEC, and we have the operation company called Nawab. And currently we have 2 stations, they are in the operation mode. So as Engineer Mark and Engineer Mark, they said, there's 2 major points about nuclear power. We have renewable energy like wind, solar, and we have clean energy, which is nuclear. So nuclear considered as clean energy because it's emitted almost zero. But it is, as Mr. Mark said, safety and hazards. Just go back to history, because I believe history is the best teacher for us. 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl, Fukushima, all these things, are horrible. But if you go do some calculation, risk is severity multiplied by frequency. I mean, it is not the very accurate equation, but this is the equation we said. Nuclear power killed less than any power than fossil fuel. Before the history, when people digging for fossil fuel and oil and gas, people, people have been killed on the side. It was considered a normal thing. Doesn't mean that we stop building nuclear power. France, they have the most nuclear power as the numbers, most of the one country, and most of their electricity comes from the nuclear power. We need to go to this path. It is one of the good paths that we can go with, but we need to consider safety, because the damage here is really, it is not a joke. Like in the plane, if we have one plane crash, then we have many car accidents. But if we have one plane crash, we have the media, they talk about it, but doesn't that we stop flying? The same thing with nuclear. We need to continue, but we learn. I give you information. When happened in Fukushima 2011, as a civil engineer, I read the report. They said that one of the things that the concrete wall was almost 12 feet, but if they make it 16 or 17 feet, the wave will not, of the tsunami will not hit the plant, and it can resist. So these things we learn, but we don't quit. I said, you know what? Enough, khalas, there is no nuclear power plant. Cannot work like this. So we evolve, we'll put it, but with awareness and no rush in it. With this, there's no rush. And I think we need, again, to put we don't compromise in safety in these things. The safety comes first, because safety, this is another advice for people who work in the energy. Safety, it is not a KPI. Safety, it is a value. Don't put it as KPI. Most of the company, when I attend their meeting, they put safety as KPI. Because if you put safety as a KPI, they will be hidden. They will hide the near misses to get the bonus. No, safety, it's not a KPI. Don't associate it with bonus. Don't say we have 0 safety incident and you brag about it. If you have it, announce it. Just deal it as a value. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a new term that I really learned, and it's very insightful. Yeah. And Dr. Nasir, on your thoughts?
Yeah, I once again, the panelists already covered most of the point I was thinking about, but I think one of the most important issue is the safety. And once again, we need to share the information with the communities, like what happened in the United Arab Emirates. We need to tell the people we are following the strictest safety regulations. We are ensured there are no emissions. We are taking into the consideration into any incidents or whatever. And also, I think the research is very important, what Mark already mentioned before. Like, for example, process intensification is one of the greatest tools in achieving sustainability. And where we start thinking about process integration, about making the sizes actually much smaller. And that's where Rolls-Royce is thinking about micro. So in the future, we might have one city is not like what we call it national grid. City grid is all about it by nuclear power. So the idea of that, those big ugly buildings where the people are living around it, they are worried about the emissions and about the radiation and stuff. No, we can totally change that image about it's very small, it's very safe, and also it's very, very reliable. Now, of course, we need to take into consideration the life cycle assessment. We need to make sure, the uranium, resources, also how we can get rid of any waste. And this is also one of the biggest research area now in nuclear power, is how we deal with the waste. during the operation and after the decommission. So these also, all these things should be considered, I believe. But I think nuclear power has a big potential to be one of the green sources of energy. Thank you.
Yes, and just to add a point to this part, that UAE has agreed on the transparency under the strategy of the net carbon zero 2050. So yes, so we move on to how UAE has evolved in this so far. On to you, Iman.
Thank you, Ripandeep. I think a lot of this was covered in your slides, Ripandeep, which gave a great, excellent overview of where we are, and that also in Dr. Ghanem speech as well. There was a lot on where we are, where we stand, what's coming up in the future. So personally, I feel lucky to be living in the UAE, to be supported, to have a clear vision regarding what's coming next, what are my responsibility as an engineer, and where we're going as an industry. So great evolvement, great clarity on where we're going, and this is important. I will not repeat whatever was mentioned today, but this is definitely a great evolving, yeah.
Yeah, and I guess one of the best example is to give the live example is the Expo 2020. I'm not exaggerating on this one, or I'm not paid for this, but personally, I have visited many of the pavilions wherein they talk about the sustainability, which is at the prime, and how they have been introducing. And I can say that Expo 2020 is basically the library of the future, wherein you can go and experience it. And I've learned a lot about the green hydrogen at the Diva Pavilion, and how it is going to implement and get to 75% of the clean energy from the solar panel, with the combination of the solar panel and the hydrogen, green hydrogen. And thirdly, the hydro, I'm sorry for that one. It's from the dam, the Hatta Dam. So they are going to make use of the dam to produce this combination will give up to 75% of the clean energy. Likewise, we also learned about the ocean pollution that was from the Norway Pavilion. So each of these, they had the new technologies and how they are going to deal with the waste that will be generated. Every aspect has been very clearly studied, and it has been detailed out. Yes, to Mark, sorry, I'll keep on going on. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, that's fine. I think you know, as Emma said, that's, you know, there's a lot has been already stated, so I'll not put too much to this. But I think clearly the fact that they're committed, that they have, they're taking on COP28 in a couple of years' time is a significant step forward. And you know, the fact that there is this diversification of energy source from a country that is basically built on hydrocarbons is really quite you know, impressive in terms of the journey that they've made. But I think, you know, it's what we do from here that's going to be really more telling. And you know, the UAE has typically led the Gulf region in terms of its evolution, and I don't see that changing anytime soon.
Yeah, and Dr. Ghanem?
Thanks a lot. As my colleague, they said, I'm not going to repeat the initiative already have been presented, but as I said, maybe the unique things here in UAE, things get in fast pace. You know, maybe in different countries in the world, you need to get a bill and then you need to see it. Things get slowly. Here, if things it will add value, it will be done as fast as it can be. And I have like an advice, and I hope that we are presenting different associations: ICE, IMEC, ISTRACT, Sensitive Engineer. Keep things simple in communication here. You know, in UAE, I like the simplicity. You know, we call it an Arab basata. We can get things done by phone. You know, and we can and the infrastructure, we have the capacity to build infrastructure that can be resilient for the climate change. So let's utilize this. to put the best practice that we can use it here for our next generation.
Yeah, and Dr. Nasser, your thoughts?
Yes, yeah, I totally agree. We are already different initiatives where also as here in Dubai, the municipal solid waste, they are very, very concerned about it, and there are many initiatives whereby like in the next few years should be reduced by 75% that's sent to landfill, and also Dubai is now building one of the biggest municipal MSU energy facilities in Al Warsan. So it's not just, you know, we are looking into green energy or renewable energy. Actually, also the problem of waste, the problem of different sources of pollution are also being considered as, and make, which is the same thing. It's not waste, it actually can be a resource for energy or other materials. Thank you.
Yes, and to add a point on this one, that's largely also to not putting a burden on the client. So the triple P partnerships are coming up, that is with the initiatives. I hope you might have heard about these type of contracts. So this is how it is working on. The waste to energy is one of the very, very innovative project. And one of my projects that I've really worked on that Dr. Ghanim had shared it is refuse derived fuel. So this was a very good project, and it is the first patented project in the whole of the GCC. And on to the next question, we have the last one, but this is: how does the Paris Agreement address adaptation and loss and damage associated with the impacts of the climate change?
I think, Ripandip, the Paris Agreement certainly reaffirmed the need to minimize and address the loss and damage associated with the impact of climate change. And most importantly, through the need to, as it was mentioned earlier, the need to invest in disadvantaged countries and helping the most vulnerable people. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd echo that sentiment. I think the challenges remain that we've got countries that will be inundated by rises in average sea level. It's going to be a question of how much does humankind and particularly the developed nations take that seriously, because ultimately there are going to be fundamental shifts in the way the world looks in 50 years time or 30 years time if we haven't made some of these changes. So I think Paris set out to be like the cornerstone of what needs to be done. The challenge remains that it in itself, it was never going to fix the problem. So it's about how the subsequent COPs have impact, not only in terms of the events themselves, but effectively what comes out of them.
Yes, and mainly that we have to now take into account about the damage, because this damage is, I guess, inevitable.
Yeah, and hence the point earlier, which we've all echoed about resilience.
Yeah, that's a major point here. Dr. Ghanim?
Thank you. I refer to my presentation, the development. So in 2000, we have Millennium Development Goals. Then after 15 years, we have the Paris Agreement. So every 15 years, we have these meetings. And Paris Agreement, definitely they succeed to raise the awareness, but yet there's a challenge that we need to do. And I need to emphasize, climate change business is not a show business. It is real, it exists, and we can solve it with commercial aspect, and as Dr. Nasser, he mentioned that there should be some the business dilemma, the economic it should be there, and we can do. Let me give you an example. In UAE, in the Gulf Bank, they announced something called green bonds, that if you want to do a construction project and you meet some sustainability, I'll give you more fluidity in your cash. and we can do these things. So why I can be greener and comfortable in the same time, and it will be not only win-win situation, one for me as a client, one for you as a customer, and one for the society, triple win. So we can do that. Thank you.
Okay. And Dr. Nasser?
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I totally agree with Dr. Ghanem. I think more and more initiatives should be taken, and also it should not all the time think about global scale or even national, international, national, even on a small or medium scale, you know, as and this is one of the things about Dubai, for example, the green buildings, you know, even when you are building your house, you can follow there are different codes, but if you follow the green codes, actually you are getting some bonuses either by the financing or even by DIWA and the municipality and so on. These small initiatives, they start adding up, you know. Unfortunately, the changes that already happened to the environment or to the some ecosystem, we cannot reverse it. But we should not keep debating about who to blame, who we are, like who is the big problem, the developing countries or developed countries, and every conference we spend 2 weeks, we spend 10 days of that just in the same debates. We need to keep moving forward, okay? Need all new initiatives just to solve these problems, especially for the future generations. Thank you very much.
Very much, everyone. So without taking much of the time, I would like to thank all the speakers for taking time out of their busy schedules, that too on the start of the week, and giving their insightful presentations on these particular aspects of the COP26 on the theme of the climate change and the sustainability. We look forward to having this, how it has been involved in the future, in the upcoming events in coming time. Thank you, participants, for giving your valuable time, and thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you,
Thanks
Rependi,
a
for
lot. Thank you.
organizing.
Thank you very much. Thank you.